What would you do if your HOA fined you $250,000 for rules that didn't even apply to your property, only for you to prove in court that you owned the ground beneath their million-dollar homes? Imagine checking your mailbox and finding not one, not two, but a whole stack of letters from your neighborhood's Homeowners Association, each one carrying a new fine, each one worded more aggressively than the last. That was the daily reality for Bryson Keaton, a 52-year-old entrepreneur who thought he'd finally found peace on a few acres of land he purchased in Georgetown, Texas, just north of Austin. What he didn't realize was that his new neighbors weren't about to welcome him with open arms. Instead, they were preparing for battle. From the moment Bryson moved onto his land, the HOA seemed determined to break him down. They didn't like his shed. They didn't like the gravel driveway he put in. They even claimed his porch light was not in compliance with neighborhood standards, even though his property technically wasn't inside their gates. Still, the notices kept coming, and the fines stacked higher with every week. The numbers were shocking. $50 here, $100 there, then thousands for supposed ongoing violations. Before Bryson could even process what was happening, the total had climbed to over $250,000. $250,000, for things as small as the direction his mailbox faced. Bryson wasn't the kind of man to lose his cool easily, but these letters had a way of getting under his skin. One evening, sitting at his kitchen table with a pile of them spread out like playing cards, he vented to his longtime friend Marcus Mick Devereaux. "They're treating me like I'm some squatter on my own land," Bryson said, his voice low, steady, but carrying a sharp edge. Mick leaned back in his chair, scanning one of the letters. "They can't just fine you like this. Your land's not even inside their jurisdiction. Tell that to them," Bryson muttered, tossing another notice onto the stack. "Every week it's a new excuse. They act like they own me." Mick shook his head. "This is harassment. They're banking on you giving in. That's all it is." Bryson leaned forward, eyes narrowing. They picked the wrong man. But the HOA wasn't finished. Board meetings turned into public campaigns against Bryson. Members spoke in hushed tones at community gatherings, painting him as a rule breaker who didn't respect the character of the neighborhood. His name became a topic of gossip over morning walks and backyard barbecues. Some neighbors avoided him altogether, afraid of getting caught in the drama. Others openly stared as if he were some outlaw living at the edge of their perfect world. For Bryson, every drive past the community gates felt like a reminder that he was being watched. He'd spot neighbors slowing their cars when they saw him mowing his yard, or pausing mid-conversation when he walked into the grocery store in town. The pressure was mounting. The fines alone were crushing, but what really pushed him was the arrogance. The smug tone in those letters, the way they signed off with final notice like he was already guilty. They were counting on his silence. They were counting on his compliance. But Bryson wasn't built that way. Late one night, long after the neighborhood had gone quiet, he sat alone at his desk, flipping through old property records. The glow of his computer screen reflected in his glasses as he clicked through file after file. Somewhere deep down, he knew there had to be something they were missing, something that could turn the tables. And that's when he found it. Hidden in the paperwork from a real estate acquisition he had made years earlier was a small, easily overlooked detail. A holding company he controlled, filed under an unassuming name, was listed as the legal owner of the very land beneath the gated community itself. The HOA might have had authority over its residents, but Bryson controlled the ground their million-dollar homes were sitting on. He sat back in his chair, stunned for a moment, then allowed a smile to spread across his face. The fines, the threats, the public shaming, suddenly it all looked different. They thought they had power over him, but the truth was they had been standing on his property the entire time. But if Bryson thought the discovery would end the conflict, he was wrong. It was only the beginning. The next HOA meeting was held inside the clubhouse that sat near the community's entrance. Rows of neatly lined chairs filled the room, and the air carried that forced politeness you only find in places where everyone is pretending to get along. But that evening, there was no mistaking the tension. People weren't there to chit-chat about landscaping or pool hours. They were there for one reason: Bryson Keaton. Bryson walked in with quiet confidence, a folder tucked under his arm. He wasn't there to start a fight, but he was tired of being pushed around. Heads turned as he made his way to the front row. A few whispered his name under their breath, as though saying it too loud might stir the room further. At the head of the table sat Gregory Haskell, the HOA president. Gregory was the kind of man who always dressed like he was headed to a board meeting on Wall Street, even when it was just a Tuesday evening in Texas. Beside him sat the vice president, Elaine Drummond, her glasses low on her nose, shuffling papers like she was about to prosecute someone in court. "Mr. Keaton," Gregory began, his voice firm but rehearsed. "Thank you for attending. We've received multiple reports regarding violations on your property. I trust you've seen the notices." Bryson leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I've seen them. All 24 of them." A chuckle escaped from someone in the back row, quickly silenced by a glare from Elaine. Gregory cleared his throat. "Then you know the severity. These aren't trivial matters. We have standards in this community. Uniformity protects property values. If one person refuses to comply, it impacts everyone." Bryson tilted his head slightly. "Except my property isn't in your community." The room shifted. Neighbors glanced at each other. Gregory's jaw tightened, but his smile didn't falter. "That's a common misunderstanding, Mr. Keaton. While your parcel may be outside the gates, it is still subject to HOA oversight. Our bylaws extend to all bordering lots for aesthetic consistency." Bryson reached into his folder and slid a deed across the table. "No, it doesn't. I've read your bylaws, and I've read mine. Your reach ends at your fence line. Everything beyond that is my land, not yours." For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Elaine's eyes scanned the paper, her lips pressing together. Gregory glanced at her, then back at Bryson. "Regardless," Gregory said finally, "the fines stand. If you refuse to pay, the board has authority to escalate the matter legally. That's not a threat. It's procedure." Bryson leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp. "If you want to waste your time in court, be my guest. But let's be clear, I don't answer to this board. Not now, not ever." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some residents looked uneasy, shifting in their seats. Others seemed intrigued, as though watching a show they didn't pay for. From the third row, Janice Rowland, a retired accountant who had lived there for 2 decades, raised her hand. "Excuse me, Gregory, but if his property isn't officially under the HOA, how can you keep fining him? Won't that just blow back on us?" Elaine cut in quickly. "Mrs. Rowland, the integrity of our community is at stake. We can't allow exceptions. If Mr. Keaton is permitted to disregard standards, it sets a dangerous precedent." Bryson looked directly at Janice. "They're not protecting integrity. They're protecting control. There's a difference." That line hung heavy in the room. Even the people who didn't particularly like Bryson found themselves considering it. Gregory tapped his pen against the table. "We'll be in touch with our legal team. Meeting adjourned." The shuffle of feet echoed as chairs scraped back. Neighbors filed out, some avoiding Bryson's gaze, others giving him subtle nods of support. Gregory and Elaine huddled together, whispering sharply as they gathered their papers. As Bryson stepped outside into the warm Texas evening, Mick was waiting for him by his truck. "How bad was it?" Mick asked. Bryson smirked, unlocking the door. "Bad enough. They're dead set on dragging me to court. Let them try." Mick shook his head. "You know they're gonna spin this. Paint you as the enemy." Bryson's smile faded. "Yeah, I know. But the truth doesn't scare me. It scares them." But as the fines kept piling up, and the HOA doubled down on its threats, Bryson realized this wasn't going to be a simple standoff. It was a full-blown war. By the start of summer, the fines had taken on a life of their own. What began as a few notices about cosmetic issues had escalated into an avalanche of paperwork, each letter more aggressive than the last. Bryson had stopped counting after the total hit $100,000. By July, the balance was more than $250,000. It was no longer about the money. It was about principle. Bryson sat at his kitchen table one evening, papers spread everywhere like confetti after a storm. His teenage nephew, Tobias Keaton, had stopped by to help him with yard work and now stared at the pile in disbelief. "They're charging you this much for a shed?" Tobias asked, his voice half shocked, half amused. Bryson let out a dry laugh. "For a shed? For a mailbox? For the gravel in my driveway? You name it, they've got a problem with it." Tobias picked up one letter and read aloud. "Violation. Non-standard exterior lighting. Fine. $2,000. Seriously?" Bryson leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "It's harassment. Plain and simple. They're trying to bury me in paperwork until I give in." His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Mick popped up. "HOA spreading word you're delinquent. Watch your back." Bryson sighed. "See that? Now they're poisoning the well, making it sound like I'm some deadbeat who doesn't pay his dues, except I don't owe them a dime." Tobias frowned. "So what do? Just ignore it?" Bryson's eyes hardened. "No, you don't ignore bullies. You stand your ground." But standing his ground came at a cost. At the local grocery store, Bryson could feel the stares. Two women in the produce aisle stopped their conversation as he walked past. A man he'd nodded to weeks before turned away, pretending to study a shelf of cereal. The gossip spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered that Bryson was refusing to follow basic rules. Others claimed he was dragging down property values. Some said he was reckless, a bad influence on the community. One afternoon, while filling his truck at a gas station, Bryson ran into Caleb Morton, another homeowner from the gated subdivision. Caleb didn't bother hiding his disdain. "Bryson," Caleb said, folding his arms. "You think you're above the rules, don't you?" Bryson tightened the gas cap on his truck. "No, Caleb, I just don't follow rules that don't apply to me," Caleb scoffed. "That's the kind of thinking that ruins neighborhoods. People like you make everything harder for the rest of us. You're selfish." Bryson turned, meeting his eyes. "Selfish is when a group tries to control land they don't own. Tell your board if they want a fight, they'll get one." The tension hung in the air as Caleb walked away, muttering under his breath. Back home, Bryson pulled out a legal pad and started jotting notes. He was no stranger to business disputes. He'd negotiated contracts, managed employees, and dealt with competitors. But this was personal. The HOA wasn't just trying to fine him, they were trying to paint him as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. Later that night, Mick stopped by again, carrying a six-pack of Shiner Bock. Dropping it on the counter, he scanned the piles of letters. "Looks worse every time I come here." "They've hit $250,000 now," Bryson said, almost with a grin. "It's so outrageous it's funny." Mick cracked open a beer. "Funny until they drag you into court." Bryson looked at him steadily. "Let them. I'm ready." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it pressing in. Then Bryson added, almost to himself, "They think they're holding the cards. They don't know the hand I've got." Mick raised a brow. "What do you mean?" Bryson hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet. But when the time comes, they'll find out." The fines kept coming. But so did Bryson's resolve. Every new letter only confirmed what he already knew. The HOA was bluffing, pushing harder in hopes he'd break. But Bryson wasn't bluffing. He was preparing. But when the HOA delivered their final threat, legal action in court, Bryson knew it was time to reveal the ace up his sleeve. The letter that pushed everything over the edge didn't look any different from the others at first glance. Same letterhead, same smug legal tone, same signature at the bottom from Elaine Drummond, the HOA's vice president. But this one carried a weight the others hadn't. It wasn't just another fine. It was a notice of legal action. Bryson read it twice, then a third time, making sure he hadn't misunderstood. The words were clear. If he didn't pay the balance of his fines, all $250,000 of them, the HOA would file a lawsuit in Williamson County Court to recover the amount plus attorney fees. For a moment, Bryson just sat at his kitchen counter, the letter dangling from his fingers. It wasn't shock he felt. It was something closer to irritation, the way you'd feel if a mosquito bit you for the 10th time in the same spot. He grabbed his phone and called Mick. "They're taking me to court," Bryson said, his tone flat. There was a pause on the line. Then Mick laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You're kidding. I wish I was." Bryson dropped the letter onto the counter with the rest of the stack. They think this is their big move, like they've finally got me cornered. You're not paying a dime, though, right? Mick asked. Not a dime, Bryson confirmed. They don't realize the ground they're standing on isn't even theirs. That night, Bryson sat at his desk, pulling out the old paperwork again. He ran his finger along the pages, highlighting the details others had overlooked. Years ago, he'd bought into a holding company as part of a real estate venture. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, just another business move. But now, that acquisition had turned into the sharpest weapon in his arsenal. On paper, that company owned the land beneath the subdivision. The houses, the lawns, the driveways. All of it sat on property that technically tied back to Bryson. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same board that had been threatening him, mocking him, and trying to bury him under fines was about to find out they had no legal footing at all. But the board didn't see it that way. A week later, the HOA held another meeting. This time, the turnout was bigger. Word of the lawsuit had spread, and the room buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors leaned forward in their chairs, eager for the spectacle. Gregory Haskell, the HOA president, opened the meeting with a grin that didn't hide his confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this board has exercised every option available to bring Mr. Keaton into compliance. Unfortunately, he has refused to cooperate. As such, we have voted unanimously to pursue legal action." A few claps echoed from the back of the room. Gregory continued, "Our community is built on standards. If one person decides those standards don't apply to him, then what's the point? We must protect our property values and our way of life." Bryson sat quietly in the front row, listening. When Gregory finished, he raised his hand. "You done?" Bryson asked evenly. Gregory's smile faltered slightly. "Do you have something to add?" Bryson stood. His voice carried, steady and firm. "You keep talking about standards, but let's call this what it is. You're not protecting property values. You're trying to bully me into submission. And now you're wasting everyone's time and money chasing a lawsuit you can't win." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elaine leaned toward Gregory, whispering something sharp in his ear, but Bryson didn't stop. "You want to drag me into court? Fine. But when we get there, the judge will see the truth, and so will every person sitting in this room." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Janice Rowland spoke up again from the middle row. "Gregory, are you absolutely sure this lawsuit won't backfire on us?" Elaine straightened, her voice clipped. "Mrs. Rowland, this board knows exactly what it's doing. We have consulted legal counsel. We are confident in our position." Bryson gave a half smile. Confidence isn't the same as being right. The meeting ended in a flurry of chatter. Some neighbors left angry, muttering about Bryson ruining the community. Others seemed more cautious, exchanging uncertain glances. Bryson walked out with his head high, but he knew this was no longer just about fines or gossip. The battlefield was shifting to a courtroom, where every detail would matter. As he climbed into his truck, Mick's words replayed in his head. "They're gonna spin this. Paint you as the enemy." Bryson knew that was true, but he also knew he had something stronger than spin. He had the deed. But what Bryson couldn't predict was how explosive the truth would be once it came out in front of a judge. Bryson stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and turned to Mick, who had been sitting in the gallery. "Told you they didn't know the hand I was holding," Bryson said with a grin. Mick shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "You just lit a fire under this whole place." But if Bryson thought the revelation would calm things down, he was wrong. Outside the courtroom, the neighborhood was about to erupt in chaos. Courtrooms have a way of stripping people bare. You can walk in with all the confidence in the world, but once you're standing in front of a judge, every word, every piece of paper, every detail you thought no one would notice suddenly matters. For Bryson Keaton, that morning in the Williamson County Courthouse wasn't just about defending himself. It was about turning the tables. The HOA board arrived first, flanked by their attorney, a sharp-tongued man named Clinton Avery, known in Georgetown for being aggressive in small-town disputes. Gregory Haskell and Elaine Drummond sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, their postures upright, faces calm, but their eyes burned with a hunger to win. This was their moment to put Bryson in his place. Bryson entered with his own lawyer, Renee Callahan, a no-nonsense attorney in her 40s, who'd built her reputation handling complex real estate cases in Austin. Unlike the HOA's theatrical entrance, Renee walked in quietly, set her files down, and gave Bryson a reassuring nod. "Stay calm," she whispered. "We have the facts. Let them dig their own hole." The judge, Harold Branning, a man with salt and pepper hair and a voice that carried without effort, called the room to order. "We're here to address case number 243119, Georgetown Estates HOA versus Mr. Bryson Keaton. Plaintiffs, you may begin." Clinton Avery wasted no time. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and launched into his opening statement. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of a property owner refusing to comply with the standards of the community in which he resides. The HOA has issued repeated notices, all ignored. Fines totaling over $250,000 have been levied, and still Mr. Keaton refuses to respect the rules. This lawsuit seeks enforcement of those fines, plus attorney fees, to ensure fairness for all residents." Gregory sat tall, chin lifted, while Elaine scribbled notes furiously. Their faces read victory before the case had even begun. When Clinton sat down, Renee rose slowly. She didn't posture. She didn't perform. She simply placed a single folder on the podium and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, this case is not about fairness. It's about overreach. The HOA has spent months issuing fines against my client for rules that do not apply to him. His land was never annexed into the subdivision. He is not, nor has he ever been, under their jurisdiction. And today, we will show that the HOA has no legal standing to collect a single cent." Murmurs fluttered through the courtroom. A few residents from the subdivision had come to watch, filling the benches. They leaned forward, eyes darting between Bryson and the board. The first hour of testimony was exactly what Bryson expected. The HOA paraded documents, bylaws, and testimony from Elaine about how uniformity protected property values. Gregory spoke with righteous indignation about community harmony and shared responsibility. Clinton hammered away at the idea that Bryson's refusal was a threat to every homeowner. But then, it was Renee's turn. She stood and handed the judge a series of property deeds, each carefully labeled. "Your Honor, what the plaintiffs have failed to disclose, or perhaps failed to understand, is that the very ground this subdivision sits on is owned by a holding company. My client, Mr. Keaton, happens to be the majority shareholder of that company." Gasps echoed across the room. Gregory's face paled. Elaine dropped her pen, and for the first time that day, her composure cracked. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Are you saying the defendant owns the land beneath the subdivision?" Renee nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. While the homeowners own their houses, the deeded land itself traces back to my client's holding company. I have certified copies of the original acquisition records." Clinton shot up from his chair. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the issue of fines." Renee turned, calm as ever. "On the contrary, Your Honor, the HOA cannot fine someone who is not under its jurisdiction, and in fact the HOA itself sits on land controlled by my client. Their authority stops at their fence. Mr. Keaton holds the deed beneath it." The judge leaned back, silent for a long moment. The room buzzed with whispers, people elbowing each other, trying to process what they'd just heard. Bryson sat perfectly still, watching Gregory's expression harden into disbelief. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Finally, Judge Branning raised his hand for silence. "I'll need to review the documents thoroughly, but on its face this presents a serious challenge to the plaintiff's standing. For now, I'm ordering a recess." The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted. Residents turned on one another in heated whispers. Gregory barked at Clinton, his face flushed red. Elaine buried her head in her notes, scribbling furiously as though she could write her way out of the mess. The courthouse cafeteria was usually quiet, a place where lawyers grabbed bad coffee and hurried sandwiches between hearings. But that afternoon, it buzzed with energy. Residents from Georgetown estates clustered around tables, whispering, debating, and speculating about what they had just witnessed. Some looked stunned, others angry, a few even amused. The revelation had shaken the entire community. Bryson kept to himself at a corner table with his lawyer, Renee. He sipped his coffee slowly, calm in a way that frustrated his opponents. Across the room, Gregory and Elaine sat with their attorney, Clinton Avery, their voices sharp and urgent. "This changes nothing," Gregory said, his jaw tight. "We keep pressing. He's trying to distract from the fact that he refused to comply with community rules." Clinton frowned. "It changes everything, actually. If what his lawyer showed holds up, your authority doesn't extend beyond the gates. That means you've been fining a man illegally for months. Judges don't look kindly on that." Elaine's voice cracked. "So what are you saying? We lose?" Clinton leaned in. "I'm saying you'd better prepare for the possibility." When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. Word had spread so quickly that even people who didn't live in Georgetown estates had shown up, eager to see the drama unfold. The gallery was packed, and the judge had to call for quiet more than once. Renee rose first. She presented more documents, survey maps, chain of title records, and county filings that all traced back to Bryson's holding company. She spoke with clarity, never raising her voice, but every sentence struck like a hammer. "Your Honor, the HOA's entire claim rests on jurisdiction, but as these records show, they never had it. They fined my client as if he were under their authority, when in fact, his land, and theirs, ties back to him." Judge Branning flipped through the documents carefully. His expression gave nothing away. Clinton stood abruptly, his voice rising. "Your Honor, this is a stunt. My clients represent the interests of dozens of families who purchased homes under the belief they were joining a community with standards. If Mr. Keaton is allowed to skirt those standards, it undermines the entire system." Renee responded smoothly. "With respect, Mr. Avery, it's not about skirting standards, it's about legal rights. My client cannot be fined by an organization that has no lawful authority over him. The law doesn't bend for convenience." The judge looked up, his voice measured. "Mr. Avery, your argument presumes authority where there may be none. Do you have documentation that proves the HOA's jurisdiction extends to Mr. Keaton's property?" Clinton hesitated. His eyes darted to Gregory, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Elaine shuffled papers, but none of them provided the answer. "No, Your Honor," Clinton admitted finally. "But that will be enough," Judge Branning cut him off. "What I see here is an HOA that may have exceeded its bounds. I will reserve my final ruling until I review every record thoroughly. But let me be clear. At this moment, I see no legal basis for the fines levied against Mr. Keaton." The gavel struck again. The words reverberated through the room. Gasps and whispers erupted from the gallery. Some residents looked relieved, others horrified. Gregory sat frozen, his face flushed, while Elaine scribbled furiously again, though it seemed pointless now. Bryson stood, buttoning his jacket. His eyes met Gregory's across the room. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. As Bryson walked out into the Texas sun, Mick fell into step beside him. "That's it then?" Mick asked. "Not yet," Bryson said quietly. "The judge hasn't ruled, but the board knows what's coming." Mick let out a low whistle. "You just pulled the rug out from under the whole neighborhood. They won't know whether to thank you or hate you." Bryson glanced back at the courthouse doors, where Gregory stood in the shadows, glaring. "Oh, I know exactly which way they'll lean. But this isn't about being liked. It's about being right." Outside, residents gathered in clusters, voices rising. Some confronted Gregory and Elaine, demanding answers. Others turned their attention to Bryson, peppering him with questions. Was it true? Did he really own the land beneath their homes? What did it mean for them? Bryson answered calmly but briefly. The HOA has no power over me. That's the truth. Everything else? We'll see. But as the ruling loomed and the community divided, Bryson realized the courtroom was just one battleground. The real fight was about to erupt inside the neighborhood itself. The shock from the courtroom carried straight back into the neighborhood. Georgetown Estates was no longer the picture of suburban calm it had once pretended to be. At the clubhouse, where community meetings usually centered on lawn maintenance or pool repairs, the conversations now had an edge sharp enough to cut glass. The first meeting after the court session was standing room only. Dozens of homeowners crammed into the space, their voices overlapping in heated bursts before the board even called the session to order. Some waved HOA newsletters in the air like evidence. Others simply crossed their arms, staring at Gregory and Elaine with growing suspicion. Gregory tapped the microphone, his voice firm but tired. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you the board has acted in good faith. This case is not over. We are confident the court will ultimately rule in our favor. That was enough to ignite the crowd. From the back, a man named Victor Landry, a contractor who'd lived in the subdivision for 10 years, shot to his feet. In good faith? You fined a man $250,000 when you had no authority to do it. You dragged this neighborhood into a lawsuit without telling us the whole truth. That's not good faith, Gregory. That's reckless. Applause and murmurs rippled across the room. Elaine leaned forward, gripping the mic. We acted to protect property values. Without uniformity, without rules, this community loses everything it stands for. Janice Rowland stood, her voice carrying over the noise. Protecting property values doesn't mean breaking the law. If Mr. Keaton really owns the land under our houses, then what happens to us? What happens to our investments? The room erupted again, people shouting over each other. Some demanded Gregory's resignation, others shouted back, insisting Bryson was exaggerating the situation to make himself look powerful. In the corner, Bryson sat quietly, arms crossed, just listening. He hadn't planned to attend, but Mick insisted he should hear what was being said. Look at them, Mick whispered beside him. They're turning on each other faster than they ever turned on you. Bryson's jaw tightened. That's because I'm the reminder they've been giving blind trust to the wrong people. A woman near the front turned suddenly, pointing at Bryson. What about you? If you own the land, does that mean you can charge us rent? Kick us out? What's stopping you from holding this whole neighborhood hostage? The room quieted, all eyes on him. Bryson stood slowly, his presence filling the space without effort. I didn't ask for this, he said plainly. I bought my property to live on, not to fight a war with my neighbors. The board picked this fight when they decided I wasn't playing by their rules. The truth came out in court because they pushed me there. As for your homes, you own your houses. I don't want them. I don't want your money. What I do want is for this board to stop using authority it doesn't have. The silence was heavy, but it didn't last. Gregory stepped forward, his face red. Don't let him fool you. This man is dangerous. If he controls the land, what's stopping him from rewriting our lives however he pleases? He wants power, and he's enjoying this. A chorus of voices broke out, some defending Bryson, others backing Gregory. The meeting spiraled so far out of control that finally someone called for order and slammed the gavel down. But the damage was done. Later that evening, Bryson returned home to find an anonymous letter taped to his mailbox. The handwriting was jagged, the message short. Leave before you destroy us all. He crumpled it in his hand, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. Fear was setting in among his neighbors, and fear had a way of turning ordinary people into enemies. Back at his kitchen table, Bryson sat with Mick and Janice, who had stopped by to talk. You've got people scared, Janice admitted, her tone steady but sympathetic. Some don't know if they should fight you or thank you. And the board? They're not going down quietly. Bryson nodded slowly. Let them try. The truth is bigger than their fear. But if they keep pushing, this is going to get uglier. But the chaos inside Georgetown Estates wasn't staying local. Word was spreading fast, and soon the entire internet was watching their fight play out. The story might have started in Georgetown, but within a week, it was everywhere. Local reporters caught wind of the courthouse showdown and ran a piece with the headline, "HOA fines man $250K. Turns out he owns their neighborhood." It hit the evening news in Austin, then Dallas, then San Antonio. From there, the internet did what it always does. It magnified the story until millions of strangers had an opinion. Bryson first realized how far it spread when his phone began buzzing non-stop. Friends from out of state texted links to YouTube clips and online articles. One message from a college buddy in Arizona read, "Man, you're a meme now. Half the internet wants to buy you a beer. The other half thinks you're some kind of Bond villain." Sitting at his kitchen table, Bryson scrolled through headlines. Some painted him as a hero standing up to corrupt HOAs. Others portrayed him as a land baron plotting to seize control of his neighbors' homes. Comment sections were flooded with arguments. "This guy is fighting for property rights. Good for him. He's probably planning to charge them rent. Classic greed. HOAs have gone too far for years. Finally, someone put them in their place." Be careful what you wish for. Imagine one man owning all the dirt under your house. Mick dropped by that evening, shaking his head as he tossed his phone on the table. "You've gone viral, brother. People on Reddit are calling you the landlord of Georgetown." Bryson frowned. "That's not what I want. I didn't ask to be anyone's landlord. Doesn't matter," Mick said, cracking open a soda. "The internet writes the story it wants to write. You're the main character whether you like it or not." Meanwhile, inside the neighborhood, tensions spiked to new heights. Neighbors who once waved politely now argued in driveways. Some sided with Bryson, calling the HOA bullies who had finally been caught. Others bought into Gregory's warnings that Bryson would use his ownership to hold their homes hostage. At the clubhouse, Gregory and Elaine scrambled to regain control. They issued newsletters denouncing misinformation and painting Bryson as a manipulative outsider. Gregory even gave a shaky interview to a local station. "This individual is exploiting a legal technicality," Gregory said into the camera, his voice firm but unconvincing. "Our community will not be intimidated. We will fight to preserve the values we built here." The clip went viral for all the wrong reasons. Commenters mocked his stiff delivery and the way Elaine hovered in the background, shuffling papers nervously. Memes popped up overnight with captions like, "When you find the guy who owns your yard," and "HOA presidents when they realize monopoly is real life." Janice Rowland, who had tried to mediate at meetings, found herself fielding questions from neighbors desperate for clarity. She stopped by Bryson's house one afternoon, her face lined with worry. "They're losing control," she told him. "Gregory's doubling down, but people aren't buying it anymore. Half the neighborhood feels betrayed. The other half is panicking about what you might do next." Bryson sighed. "All I want is peace, Janice. I never asked to be dragged into this circus." Janice gave a weary smile. "Doesn't matter what you asked for. You're holding the cards now, and everyone knows it." By the end of the month, national outlets picked up the story. CNN ran a segment. Fox News debated it on a panel. TikTok users stitched clips of Bryson walking out of court with captions like, "When the HOA picks the wrong neighbor." One evening, Bryson sat in his living room watching a commentator on TV describe him as a symbol of individual rights against collective overreach. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, "I'm just a guy who wanted a shed." But the exposure brought more than attention. It brought pressure. Law firms reached out offering representation. Journalists camped outside the neighborhood, snapping photos of Bryson's house. Some strangers even drove by, slowing down to take videos as if he were a roadside attraction. Mick leaned against the porch rail one night, watching headlights crawl past. "You know, you're living in a fishbowl now. Everything you do from here on out, people are going to dissect it." Bryson looked out across the darkened fields. "Then I'll give them something worth dissecting. The truth." But while the internet argued and the cameras rolled, the real question still haunted the people inside Georgetown Estates. What did it mean to live on land that belonged to the man they had tried so hard to destroy? By the time fall rolled around, Georgetown Estates no longer felt like the polished community its glossy brochures had once promised. The lawns were still trimmed, the streets still lined with SUVs and tidy mailboxes, but beneath that surface was a neighborhood at war with itself. The HOA board held emergency meetings almost weekly, desperate to keep their grip on authority. Gregory Haskell stood at the front of each one, voice strained, trying to rally the homeowners. "We can't let one man dictate our future," he insisted, pounding his fist lightly on the podium. "This community was built on standards, on unity. If we give in, everything we've worked for collapses." But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Whispers spread in the rows of chairs. Some homeowners outright challenged him. "You said you were protecting us," Victor Landry shouted from the back. "Turns out you were just dragging us deeper into a mess you created," others chimed in. "Why didn't you tell us about the land ownership? Why hide it?" Gregory tried to hold his composure, but the cracks showed. His once loyal supporters were slipping away. Elaine Drummond sat beside him, face pale, scribbling notes she never seemed to finish. Meanwhile, Bryson kept mostly to himself, but silence didn't make him invisible. Neighbors showed up at his gate, some angry, some pleading. One evening, a couple knocked on his door, exhaustion etched across their faces. "Mr. Keaton," the husband began, his tone measured but tense. "We've got 2 kids in this neighborhood. We bought here because we thought we were buying stability. Now all we hear about is lawsuits and land deeds. We just want to know where this ends." Bryson invited them in, offering them seats at his dining table. "I get it," he said. "I didn't ask for any of this either. I just wanted to live on my property without being harassed. But the board kept pushing, and when you push a man long enough, he pushes back." The wife leaned forward, her voice softer. "So what happens now? Do you control us?" Bryson shook his head firmly. "No. You control your homes. You live your lives. I'm not here to collect rent or run your community. All I ever wanted was respect. The same respect everyone else gets without question." The couple exchanged a look, and for the first time, Bryson saw something other than suspicion in their eyes. It was understanding. Word of that conversation spread quickly. Soon, more neighbors began approaching Bryson, not with anger, but with curiosity. They wanted to hear his side, not the board's version. Each time, Bryson said the same thing. "I don't want your houses. I want fairness." The shift rattled Gregory. His grip on power weakened as more residents started questioning why they paid dues to an organization that might not even have authority to enforce its rules. Attendance at meetings dropped. Some homeowners flat out refused to pay their HOA fees, citing Bryson's case as justification. Janice Rowland, who had always been the voice of reason, stepped up at one meeting and delivered words that carried more weight than anything Gregory had said in months. "Maybe it's time we ask ourselves why we trusted a handful of people to decide so much of our lives," she said. "We gave them power without question, and when they abused it, it took someone like Bryson to show us the truth. Maybe the lesson isn't about who owns the land. Maybe it's about remembering that authority only exists if we let it." The room fell quiet. Even those who still distrusted Bryson had no rebuttal. Outside of Georgetown Estates, the debate mirrored the one inside. Commentators argued about property rights, HOA abuse, and whether homeowners ever truly understood the contracts they signed. Some called for reform. Others pointed to Bryson's story as a warning. Never assume the rules are written in your favor. One night, as Bryson stood on his porch watching the Texas sky fade into dusk, Mick joined him, hands stuffed into his pockets. "You changed more than you think," Mick said. Bryson raised a brow. "How do you figure? You didn't just beat the board. You made people realize how blind they've been. You made them ask questions they never thought to ask." Bryson let the words hang in the air, then sighed. It shouldn't take a fight like this to remind people of their own rights. But as the dust began to settle and the neighborhood slowly came to terms with its new reality, one final question lingered. What lasting lesson would they carry from the storm that had nearly torn them apart? The months that followed brought a kind of uneasy calm to Georgetown Estates. The lawsuit never resurfaced. Judge Branning's final ruling confirmed what many already suspected. The HOA had no legal standing to fine Bryson. The $250,000 debt vanished with the stroke of a pen, and the board's credibility crumbled alongside it. Gregory resigned quietly, slipping a letter into the community's newsletter without so much as a public statement. Elaine vanished from the scene soon after, her reputation in tatters. The HOA still existed on paper, but its influence was a shadow of what it had once been. Homeowners who used to follow its every directive now rolled their eyes at its memos, some tossing them straight into the trash. For Bryson, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. He returned to his routines, mowing his yard, working on his shed, sipping coffee on his porch. But the neighborhood wasn't the same. Some neighbors waved again, cautiously rebuilding the bridge that had been burned. Others still avoided eye contact, embarrassed by how quickly they'd believed the worst about him. One evening, Janice Rowland stopped by, carrying a plate of peach cobbler. She set it down on Bryson's kitchen counter and said with a wry smile, "Peace offering. You deserve at least that much." Bryson chuckled. "I'll take cobbler over court papers any day." Janice grew serious. "You know, people are still talking about you. Some say you exposed the board. Others say you humiliated the whole community. But me? I think you reminded us of something we forgot. That power only works if we don't question it." Bryson nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "That's the part I wanted them to see. Not that I own the land. That doesn't matter as much as realizing they handed control to people without ever asking if it was deserved." Later that week, Bryson sat with Mick on the back porch as the crickets chirped in the fields beyond his property. "You ever wish it had gone differently?" Mick asked. Bryson leaned back in his chair. "I wish it hadn't happened at all. But if it had to, then I'm glad the truth came out. I'd rather live with honesty than comfort built on lies." Mick nodded. "Funny thing is, most people never read the fine print. They just sign, pay, and move on." "Yeah," Bryson said quietly. "Until the fine print signs them." The story of Georgetown Estates eventually faded from the headlines, but not from the people who lived through it. Some neighbors chose to move away, unable to bear the reminder of what had happened. Others stayed, determined to rebuild trust and live without the constant shadow of the HOA. And Bryson? He kept his promise. He never used his ownership of the land as leverage. He didn't raise rents, didn't issue threats, didn't flex the power he technically had. Instead, he used the ordeal as proof that standing firm mattered, even when the odds, or the paperwork, seemed stacked against you. The moral was simple but powerful. Don't hand over your freedom without asking questions. Don't let fear or convenience silence your right to know the truth. For anyone watching from outside the story, it was a lesson that stretched far beyond a gated community in Texas. Whether in neighborhoods, workplaces, or governments, authority only carries weight if it goes unchallenged. The people of Georgetown Estates learned that the hard way. As Bryson himself later told a local reporter, who checked back in months later, "I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain either. I'm just proof that you should always read the papers you sign, and never let someone else decide what's fair without looking at the facts yourself." So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Question authority. Know your rights, and never assume someone else has your best interest at heart just because they say they do. And if you want more stories like this one, stories that pull back the curtain on control, conflict, and the human fight for dignity, make sure you subscribe. Because the next story could change the way you see your own neighborhood, your own choices, maybe even your own life.